Imagine this, 80 samurai, just 80 regular guys with swords and armor. They're standing on Komeda Beach on the island of Tsushima, watching as the horizon fills up with 20,000 Mongol warriors. Think of it, like being cornered. The date is November 18th, 1274. In about 3 hours, the samurai way of life as they know it will be crushed. But to see how messed up this is, we got to jump back 7 years. This whole disaster didn't kick off with blood. It started with a letter. It's 1267, and a messenger shows up on the shores of Japan.
He's carrying a document with the seal of Kublai Khan, who at the time was the most powerful dude on earth. This guy was Genghis Khan's grandson. He'd already taken over China.
He controlled Korea. Basically, he built the biggest empire ever. And now he's setting his sights on Japan, 4 islands way east that the Mongols call the land of the rising sun. The letter itself? Simple and brutal. It basically said, hey, small countries usually try to stay on our good side, right? Well, we've taken China and Korea. So how about you send some ambassadors and cough up tribute money or else face the music? It wasn't a friendly invite. It was a death threat stamped and approved by the Kamakura shogunate, the military power running Japan back then. The leaders of Japan read the letter, probably reread it a few times, and then did something no other kingdom swallowed up by the Mongols had ever done. They acted like it didn't even exist. Total silence. No ambassadors, no tribute, not even a thanks, but no thanks. Kublai Khan wasn't used to being ignored like that. So he sent another letter, and another, and another. For 6 years, Mongol messengers kept going back and forth across the Sea of Japan, carrying the same message, only it got more threatening each time. 6 years of Japan ignoring them. 6 years of them basically saying to the world's biggest empire, we're not into your friendship, we don't want to trade with you, and we sure as heck don't want to be your little buddy. Was it super brave or just plain dumb? Here's the deal. Japan had never been invaded, ever. In all of its history, no foreign army had stepped foot on its beaches. Sure, the samurai were serious warriors, but their fighting experience was mostly from fighting each other, Japanese clans battling it out. They followed Bushido, a warrior code all about one-on-one fights. Being honorable on the field, calling out your name before you attack, the Mongols. They didn't know from Bushido and didn't care one bit. While Japan stayed silent, Kublai Khan was getting ready to do something they couldn't even imagine. Over in Korea, in ports like Man and Japo Bay, they were building an invasion fleet. 900 ships. These weren't just boats. These were war vessels. Enough to carry 15,000 Mongol and Chinese soldiers, plus another 8,000 Korean soldiers who were forced to join up. That's 23,000 men with weapons Japan had never seen. They had tactics the Japanese wouldn't understand, and a military discipline that had conquered everyone from Eastern Europe to the Pacific. Mongols didn't fight fair, they fought to win. They used poison arrows, attacked in groups, didn't bother with names. And they had something that would scare the samurai more than any sword, gunpowder bombs. Imagine iron balls packed with explosives that they launched with catapults. When those things blew up, metal shards flew everywhere, ripping people apart. The sound? Deafening. What it did to your head. Even worse, but Japan didn't know any of this was coming. While the Mongols were building their fleet, the samurai were practicing with their katanas, perfecting their archery, thinking about honor and a good death. They had no clue that honor was about to become meaningless. October 1274, the fleet sailed from Korea, 900 ships heading east to Tsushima Island. Why Tsushima? It's basically the doorway to Japan, a small island in between Korea and the main island of Kyushu. Take Tsushima, and you've got a base, a place to start your invasion of Japan. On Tsushima lived about 80 samurai, just 80. They were led by SP Sukakuni, the military governor. 80 warriors to guard a whole island. They had families, farmers who looked to them for protection. They had temples, rice fields. A way of life that had been around for generations. And now, on November 18th, they saw the horizon go dark. It wasn't a storm. It was sails, hundreds and hundreds of them. The Mongol fleet looked like a nightmare come to life. Lookouts ran to tell Sukakuni. He climbed up a cliff and just stared. He tried to count the ships. 10, 20, 50, 100. He couldn't keep up. There were just too many. Sukakuni knew basic math. 80 against thousands? He knew the choices. Give up, run to Kyushu and warn the shogunate, or do something unthinkable. Stay, fight, and die. Here's where it gets complicated. What's more important, living or keeping your honor? Sukakuni and his men knew they were dead either way. But if they ran, Tsushima would fall without a fight. The Mongols would have a safe place to set up shop. And if no one fought, the shogunate in Kyushu wouldn't understand how big the threat was. They wouldn't know this wasn't just some pirates. This was a full-blown invasion. Sukakuni made his call. They'd stay, they'd fight, and they'd send a message. It would take days to reach Kyushu, but it would be clear. Japan was under attack, and these guys weren't messing around. The Mongol fleet landed on Komeda Beach. The first boats hit the sand, and the warriors jumped out. This is where the samurai's nightmare turned real. These weren't guys looking for a fair duel. They were a military machine. They moved in formation, shields up front, archers behind, no honor involved. Takasu Swanaga, one of the samurai from Tsushima, rode out front.
He yelled his name, expecting a Mongol warrior to answer the call, expecting a duel. Instead, he got a shower of arrows.
The Mongols didn't wait, they didn't talk back. They just shot. Hundreds of arrows filled the sky. Swanaga got hit 3 times almost at once. One in the shoulder, one in the leg, and the third killed his horse. He went down, rolling in the sand. He was going to die on this beach without even crossing swords with anyone. But Swanaga didn't die, not yet. One of his buddies, a samurai named Shi Mitiosu, saw what was happening and charged straight into the Mongol line, yelling and trying to distract them. Mitiosu fell, but those few seconds gave Swanaga a chance to crawl away. He lived, one of the few who would see what was to come. The 80 samurai were being slaughtered. This wasn't a battle, it was an organized killing. The Mongols didn't fight alone, they fought as a team. When a samurai charged, 10 Mongols would surround him, attacking from every angle. No duels, no honor, just brutal efficiency. Then the samurai heard something new. A high-pitched whistle in the air, followed by an explosion that shook the ground. Gunpowder bombs, iron balls as big as a head, flying through the air from the Mongol ships. When they landed, they blew up with a deafening roar, fire everywhere. Metal flew in all directions like 1,000 knives. Horses freaked out. Men screamed. Some of the samurai had never heard an explosion before. They thought it was magic, the anger of the gods. But it was worse than that. It was technology. That was the real difference between a civilization that had been at war constantly and an island that had mostly fought with itself. Sukakuni watched his men fall one after another.
He saw the Mongol formation moving forward like a tide.
He drew his katana. There was a samurai tradition. When you knew you were done for, when there was no way out, a warrior could choose to die fighting or kill himself. Seppuku, ritual suicide. Dying with dignity instead of being killed like an animal. Sukakuni didn't pick either. He charged straight into the Mongol formation. His remaining men followed him, 23 samurai in a last desperate charge. They yelled, swung their katanas, threw themselves against a wall of shields and spears. None of them made it. The fight on Komeda Beach lasted less than 3 hours. 80 samurai were dead. The Mongols took some losses, but not many. Maybe 100 men, maybe less. It was such a complete victory that the Mongols didn't even see it as a real battle. For them, it was just a warm-up. Now they controlled the beach, and the rest of the army could come ashore. 20,000 warriors stepped onto Japanese soil for the first time ever. And the real invasion of Tsushima started. The Mongols weren't wasting time. They split up. One group moved inland, looking for villages and temples, checking for any resistance. Another group secured the coast, and a third group started building forts. The Mongol strategy? They didn't just invade, they conquered and stayed. The people of Tsushima heard the Mongol war drums echoing in the hills. They saw the smoke from the enemy campfires. They knew the 80 samurai weren't coming back. Some families ran into the mountains, hiding in the forests and caves. Others tried to escape to Kyushu in small boats. A lot of them didn't make it. Mongol patrols were all over the water, capturing anyone trying to get away. And this is where the Mongols showed how brutal they could be. They didn't just kill soldiers. They had a terror tactic they de-perfected over 40 years of conquering, making sure the next target surrendered before they even arrived. How? By making the stories of the survivors so awful no one would want to fight. The Mongols took prisoners, hundreds of civilians, women, kids, old priests, tied them up, and then did something that would stay in Japanese memory for centuries. They pierced the palms of their hands, ran ropes through the holes, and hung the prisoners from the sides of their ships, like human banners. Imagine that. Imagine being a soldier on the next island, looking out at the horizon, seeing the Mongol fleet coming with bodies hanging from the ships. People who were still alive, people screaming. That was the message. This is what's waiting for you if you resist. Some prisoners were beheaded, their heads piled on the beach as a warning. The Mongols had a twisted way of counting. Tsushima fell completely in 2 days. 2 days to take an entire island. The few samurai left in the faraway villages tried to put up a fight, but they died. There was no glory in these deaths, no poems, just mud and blood and bodies left unburied. But something important had happened there, something the Mongols didn't count on. Before he died, Sukekuni got a message out. A rider got away in the first hours of the attack, crossed the water to Kyushu in a small boat, and arrived in Dazaifu, the main city of Kyushu, with news that sounded impossible. A huge fleet, thousands of warriors, weapons that exploded like thunder. Tsushima had fallen. The governor of Dazaifu, Shiny Sunsuk, heard the report. At first, he didn't believe it. Really? 6 years since the last letter from Kublai Khan, 6 years of silence. A lot of people in the shogunate thought the Mongol emperor had forgotten about Japan, that he was busy taking over China, that the threats were just empty words. Sunsuk now knew the truth. The threats were real. He started moving, sent urgent messages to Kamakura, the capital of the shogunate, told all the samurai in Kyushu to gather on the coast, and started evacuating villages near the sea, getting ready for a fight. But here's the problem. Japan didn't have a unified army. There was no draft. The samurai were great fighters, but they were few. Maybe 3,000 in the whole Kyushu area against 20,000 Mongols, and the Mongols were already moving. After Tsushima, the fleet sailed again. The next target, Iki Island, only 50 kilometers from Tsushima, even closer to Kyushu. If Iki fell, the Mongols would be knocking on Japan's front door. Iki was bigger than Tsushima, had more people and more defenders, about 120 samurai led by Taira no Kagetaka. Kagetaka knew what had happened on Tsushima. The messenger got to him with all the details, the Mongol formations, the bombs, the complete slaughter. Kagetaka had a choice to make, the same choice Sukekuni had faced. Stay and die or run and live. But Kagetaka had something Sukekuni didn't: time. Days to get ready. He could organize a defense, pick the battlefield, make the Mongols pay for every inch of ground. Or he could take his men, their families, and as many civilians as he could and get out to Kyushu before the fleet showed up. Save lives, or stand and die for honor. Kagetaka went with honor. He stayed.
He set up barricades on the beaches, put archers in the hills,
Moved the women and children to the center of the island and waited. November 20th, the Mongol fleet showed up on the horizon. Kagetaka saw the same 900 ships. He saw the bodies hanging from the sides. Recognized some faces, people from Tsushima he'd met at festivals and ceremonies, now just corpses swaying in the waves. The landing started. The Mongols had it down to a science. Bombs first, the catapults on the ships sending dozens of them toward the coast. They blew up among the defenders, horses running wild. Then archers, thousands of arrows filling the sky. The samurai took cover behind the barricades they had built. Then came the infantry. The Mongols charged, but this time they ran into a real fight. Kagetaka had split his men into small groups. They didn't charge blindly to their deaths. They found good spots, hills, narrow paths, places where the Mongol numbers didn't matter as much. It worked for a few hours. The Mongols took the beach, but when they tried to move inland, the samurai struck back from the sides, quick attacks and retreats. They killed dozens of Mongols, maybe hundreds, but the Mongols had 20,000 men and all day to fight. The Mongol formations adapted, sending out scouts, finding the ambush before they happened, surrounding the defensive positions, slowly crushing every point of resistance. 120 samurai became 100, then 80, 60, 40. Kagetaka got hit, an arrow in his side, another in his leg.
He was bleeding, but he kept giving orders, regrouping the survivors in a small fort in the middle of the island.
It was made of wood, wouldn't stop a real attack, but maybe it could last until nightfall. And in the dark, maybe some of them could escape. The Mongols surrounded the fort, but they didn't attack right away. They weren't in a hurry. They let the fear build, letting the defenders hear the screams of the captured civilians, letting them imagine what was coming. Then they launched the bombs, one after the other. The fort burned, the wooden walls blew apart. Kagetaka came out with his last 20 men, charging one last time.
He didn't shout his name, didn't look for a duel.
He just fought, killed 3 Mongols before a spear went through him. He fell, tried to get up. A Mongol soldier came over, raised his sword. Kagetaka closed his eyes. Iki fell in one day. 120 samurai dead. Thousands of civilians captured, the same horrors, hands pierced, heads piled up, bodies hung on the ships. 2 islands, 200 warriors wiped out in less than a week. And now the Mongol fleet was heading to Kyushu, the heart of Japan. November 23rd, the 900 ships arrived at Hakata Bay on the north coast of Kyushu. It was the biggest landing in Japanese history, 20,000 Mongol warriors against 3,000 samurai scattered around the area. The odds were terrible, but something had changed. The samurai in Kyushu had days to prepare. They'd heard the stories. They knew the old ways of fighting wouldn't work. They knew honor would get them killed. For the first time, Japanese samurai had to change or die. And behind them was the whole nation. If Kyushu fell, Japan fell. There was nowhere else to run. This was it. The Mongols landed at Hakata. The beach was wide open, perfect for a massive landing. Bombs exploded, arrows flew, formations moved forward. They expected another easy win. Instead, they got something different. The samurai didn't charge or shout. They held their ground, waited. And when the Mongols got close, they struck back in waves. They didn't fight alone. They fought as groups. It was messy, improvised, but it worked better than dying a hero. The Mongols moved forward, but they paid a price. For every kilometer they took, they lost men. The beach turned into a slaughterhouse. Night came. The Mongols controlled the coast, but hadn't gotten far inland. They regrouped, started campfires, planned the big push for the next day. The samurai pulled back to the hills nearby, exhausted, wounded, but alive. And then the sky changed. The clouds turned black. The wind started howling from the sea, strong enough to bend trees. The Mongols on the beach looked to the horizon. Something was coming, big time. It was a storm, but not just any storm. It was a typhoon, a Pacific hurricane that had been building up for days out at sea. And now, on the night of November 23rd, it hit Hakata Bay with everything it had. The waves rose, 10-12 meters high. The 900 Mongol ships anchored in the bay started smashing into each other. Sailors tried to cut the anchors, get away from the coast, sail into deeper water, but it was too late. The wind pushed them, the waves dragged them. Ships slammed against the rocks and broke apart. Mongol warriors sleeping on deck were thrown into the water. Those below deck were trapped as the ships sank. The ocean swallowed hundreds of ships in hours. On land, the Mongols who had already landed were trapped. The wind was so strong they couldn't stand up. Tents blew away, campfires were put out, rain fell like spears. And in total darkness, not able to see 3 feet in front of them, they heard something even worse than the storm. The samurai attacked, taking advantage of the chaos. They knew the land, moved in the dark like ghosts, striking the Mongol camps, killing, disappearing, striking again somewhere else. The Mongols couldn't hold a line, couldn't use their formations. They were blind, wet, and terrified. Dawn broke on November 24th. The storm was still going, but not as strong. The samurai went back to the hills and looked toward the bay. What they saw was unbelievable. The coast was covered in wreckage, broken wood, floating bodies, capsized ships. Out of the 900 ships, maybe 300 were still floating, maybe less. The Mongols on land were crushed. Without ships, they were stuck in enemy territory. Without supplies, they would starve. Without help, they would be killed. The Mongol commander, a general named Kim Bangjong, made a desperate call: retreat now. He told everyone to get back to the remaining ships, leaving behind equipment, the wounded, any thought of taking Kyushu. The beaten-up fleet sailed back to Korea. Of the 20,000 warriors who had come, about 13,000 went home. 7,000 died. Not in glorious battle, but in a storm. The Japanese watched the ships leave, not sure what to think. They had won, not because they were better fighters, not because they had more men, but because of the weather, pure luck. Or maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was something else. In the temples of Kyushu, Buddhist monks and Shinto priests had been praying since they heard about the invasion, asking for the gods to protect them, begging for a miracle. And just when it looked like the end, the storm had come. The Japanese gave that wind a name, Kamikaze, divine wind, the wind sent by the gods to save Japan from invasion. It was the start of a story that would last 700 years. But here's the question no one wanted to ask: what happens when the gods do and send another miracle? Because Kublai Khan wasn't done. The invasion of 1274 was just a first try, a way to test the waters. Now he knew Japan was weak. He knew the samurai could be beaten. He knew that with more men, more ships, and a better plan, he could take the islands. And he had 7 years to get ready. In Japan, the Kamakura shogunate was scared to death. They had won, but just barely. Tsushima was destroyed. Iki was ruined. Thousands of civilians were dead or captured. If the Mongols came back with an even bigger army, Japan wouldn't survive. The regent of the shogunate, Haji Tokimun, ordered a total mobilization, building walls all along the coast of Kyushu, recruiting more samurai, training in new tactics. For the first time, Japan was ready to fight a total war against an outside enemy. The walls started going up in Hakata, 2-meter-high stone structures around the whole bay. Simple idea. If the Mongols couldn't land easily, their numbers wouldn't matter. They'd have to cross the walls under fire. Thousands of workers, farmers forced to build, spent years putting up those walls. Meanwhile, in China, Kublai Khan was furious. The loss wasn't about the military. It was the weather, but it was still a loss. His reputation was on the line. Mongols didn't lose invasions. They didn't run away. If he let Japan go, other countries might think they could rebel. He ordered an even bigger fleet built, not 900 ships but 4,500. Not 20,000 warriors but 140,000. The biggest invasion the world had seen in centuries. An army so huge no storm could stop it, but building a fleet of that size takes time, years. Kublai Khan needed wood, sailors, shipyards running day and night in Korea and China. And while he built, Japan got ready. The 7 years between the first and second invasion were a time of constant fear. Every spring and summer, lookouts on the coasts of Kyushu watched the horizon for Mongol sails. Every time a storm came up, farmers thought it was the Kamikaze coming back. Every time a foreign ship showed up, samurai ran to the beaches with swords drawn. Japan turned into a fortress. The walls of Hakata stretched on and on, watchtowers were built on every point, and arrows were stored by the millions. Samurai trained not just in one-on-one fights, but in group tactics. They learned to fight like the Mongols, as a team instead of lone heroes. Haji Tokumun, the shogunate regent, barely slept. He was 23 when the first invasion hit, and now he was 30. He'd spent his entire life getting Japan ready for the Mongols to come back. He went to temples, meditated, and talked to monks about the meaning of the Kamikaze. Was it a one-time thing, or would the gods always protect Japan? No one had answers, just faith. Spring 1281. Japanese spies in Korea sent worrying news. The fleet was almost done. The Mongols were loading up their troops. The invasion was close. Tokimuni called for a total mobilization. Every samurai in Japan had to go to Kyushu. Not a request, an order, or they'd be killed. Families that had been fighting for decades had to put aside their battles and join together. For the first time in generations, samurai from all over the country were fighting under one banner. About 40,000 warriors gathered in Kyushu. The biggest army Japan had ever seen, but still not enough against 140,000 Mongols. Summer, 1281, the fleet sailed. But it wasn't one fleet, it was two. The first, with 900 ships and 40,000 Mongol and Korean warriors, sailed from Korea. The second, with 3,600 ships and 100,000 Chinese soldiers, set out from southern China. The plan was for both fleets to meet off the coast of Kyushu and attack at the same time. It was the most complicated plan of coordination of the time, and from the start, it went wrong. The Korean fleet got there first in early June, and the commander named Hong Dagu decided to attack, thinking, why wait and give the Japanese more time to get ready? They attacked Tsushima and Iki again, but this time they ran into samurai who had been trained for guerrilla fighting. The Mongols landed, but the samurai hit them from the forests with constant attacks. The Mongols took the islands but lost hundreds of men. They kept going to Kyushu, got to Hakata and saw the walls, 2 meters of solid stone surrounding the whole bay with thousands of samurai. Archers waiting behind them, no way to land without losing a ton of men. Hong Dagu ordered a frontal attack. The Mongols tried to jump from the boats, run toward the walls under a rain of arrows, get there, try to climb. But the samurai pushed them back with spears and bodies piled up at the base of the walls. The Mongols retreated back to the ships. Hong Dagu knew he couldn't take Hakata with a direct assault. He needed the Chinese fleet, needed the extra 100,000 men to surround the defenses and attack from everywhere. But the Chinese fleet wasn't coming. It was held up, storms in the East China Sea, problems with getting supplies. Coordinating 2 fleets thousands of kilometers apart was almost impossible with the technology. Hong Dagu waited. His 40,000 men were stuck on ships anchored off a dangerous coast. Days turned into weeks. The summer heat was awful. Drinking water ran low. Food ran out. The men got sick, dysentery, fevers. Staying cramped on wooden ships under the Japanese sun was a recipe for disaster. And the samurai weren't sitting still. They organized night attacks. Small boats with 10 or 20 warriors would sneak up to the Mongol fleet in the dark, climb aboard the ships, kill the crew, set the sails on fire, and get away before help arrived. The Mongols called them the pirates of the night. They didn't fight fair. They attacked at night, killed quietly, and disappeared. It was terrifying. Mongol sailors couldn't sleep. Every sound in the dark might be a samurai climbing on board. Finally, in mid-July, the Chinese fleet arrived, 3,600 ships with 100,000 fresh soldiers. Hong Dagu was relieved. Now they could launch the big attacks, land at multiple points, and crush the defenders with numbers. But his men were worn out. They'd been at sea for weeks, a lot were sick, and their morale was at rock bottom. The Chinese didn't know the land, and didn't know how the Japanese fought. Hong Dagu decided to wait a few more days, regroup, and plan the attack. It seemed like a good idea, but it was the decision that would doom the invasion. August 14th, the sky went dark again. Clouds came from the south, black, heavy, spinning in spirals that sailors knew all too well. Another typhoon bigger than the one 7 years earlier. The Mongol commanders panicked, ordering the ships to weigh anchor and sail into deeper water, where the waves wouldn't be as dangerous. But 4,500 ships don't move quickly. Some were anchored too close together, others had stuck anchors, and others just didn't have enough healthy sailors to work them. The wind started to blow softly at first, then harder and with a force that ripped masts off the decks. The waves grew to impossible heights, mountains of water that threw the ships around like toys, and slammed them against the rocks. Hong Dagu was on his flagship, trying to tell everyone what to do, but no one could hear him over the howl of the wind. He saw a huge wave coming, shouted more orders, and the wave hit the ship, flipping it over. Hong Dagu fell into the water, tried to swim, but the current dragged him under. They never found his body. On land, the samurai watched from the walls. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The largest fleet in history was being destroyed right in front of them. Ships were splitting apart, men were jumping into the water only to drown seconds later. The ocean was full of debris, bodies, shredded flags. The storm lasted 2 days, 2 days of wind, rain, and waves that changed the coastline. When the sun finally rose on August 16th, Hakata Bay looked like a graveyard. Thousands of bodies were floating in the water. Wreckage covered kilometers of beach. And out of the 4,500 ships that made up the invasion fleet, less than 300 were still floating. The Mongol survivors were trapped without ships to go home, without food and without water. Some tried to surrender, swimming to shore with their hands up, but the samurai killed them all. No prisoners, not after what happened on Tsushima. Not after the bodies hanging from the ships. Not after the pierced hands. Other survivors tried to build rafts with pieces of ships, but most of them sank before they could leave the bay. The ones who managed to get away from the coast died of thirst, or were captured by Japanese fishermen, who turned them over to the samurai. For weeks, Japanese warriors searched the beaches, hunting for Mongols hiding in caves, forests, and empty villages. They hunted them like animals. Some survivors killed themselves before being captured, others fought to the end. None of them made it home. Of the 140,000 warriors who left China and Korea, about 20,000 made it back. 120,000 were dead, most drowned, some killed, others just lost in the chaos. It was the worst sea failure in history, bigger than Salamis, bigger than Actium. Kublai Khan heard the news in his palace in Daedu, modern Beijing. He stayed quiet for hours, then he ordered some of the surviving commanders to be killed. China was broke after paying for 2 giant fleets that ended up at the bottom of the ocean. Korea was ruined, and the Mongols, who had taken over half the world, were scared of the Japanese sea because surviving sailors told stories. They said Japanese gods protect that water. That any fleet trying to invade will be destroyed. That Japan is untouchable. Superstition spread, and no Mongol commander wanted to lead a third invasion. No one wanted to face the Kamikaze again. Kublai Khan died in 1294. His dream of taking Japan died with him, and no later emperor tried. For the next 650 years until World War II, no foreign power tried to invade Japan. And in Japan, the Kamikaze became a national story. Temples told it, priests preached it, and samurai admired it. The gods protect Japan, and it was thought that their country was impossible to beat. In Tsushima, survivors buried their dead. The 80 samurai who stayed when they could have run, who knew they were going to die but fought anyway. They didn't stop the invasion, but they slowed it down and sent a warning. Were they heroes or fools? It depends. But if they'd run, if they'd picked life over honor, maybe the invasion would have worked. Maybe the Mongols would have set up a base in Tsushima without a fight. Maybe they would have reached Kyushu before the walls were built, or maybe nothing would have changed. Maybe the Kamikaze would have come, but the 80 samurai didn't know. They didn't know a storm was coming, and they didn't know they would win. All they knew was they had a choice: run or stay, live or die with dignity. They picked dignity, and that choice, multiplied by hundreds of warriors in Tsushima, Iki, and Kyushu, is what saved Japan as much as any divine wind. But there's a smaller story here, the story of those who weren't heroes, who didn't die gloriously. There was Takasu Suenaga, the samurai who charged first on Komeda Beach, the one who yelled his name, expecting a duel, and got 3 arrows instead. He survived, and that survival stayed with him for the rest of his life. His neighbors treated him with respect, but there was something else too, something uncomfortable. In a culture where dying in battle is glorious, surviving when your friends die is complicated, Suenaga knew what they were thinking.
He ran. He saved himself while the real warriors died.
So he did something unusual and hired a painter to make an illustrated scroll. The scroll is called Maiko Shirai Iko Toba, the illustrated story of the Mongol invasions. It's special because it shows the samurai losing, shows the bombs exploding, and shows warriors running away. It shows Suenaga falling off his horse with arrows in him. Because he needed people to know. He needed them to know the Mongols were just some ordinary enemy, and that their win wasn't from the samurai, it was because the weather was on their side. Suenaga also wanted rewards, and the scroll would also show people the truth. It showed he was there, that he charged first, that he was hurt in battle, and that he was brave, which got him land and recognition. Suenaga had to prove himself, and samurai culture made everything suspicious. Suenaga wasn't alone. Hundreds of samurai survived the invasions, fought, and killed Mongols. When the Kamikaze came and saved Japan, a lot of samurai wanted land and money, but there was nothing left. Hajj Tokimuni tried to reward the warriors. It wasn't enough, and tension grew. And that was how the Mongols' invasions changed Japan forever. They showed that help might not come and that you need to take steps to handle anything yourself. Tokimuni died earlier. Historians say it was from the stress the invasion caused him. The Mongol invasions planted the seeds for chaos, and the Kamikaze myth grew with each generation. In the 20th century, Japanese pilots during World War II called themselves Kamikaze to send the message that they would undie and that the gods would help them. However, after World War II ended, the Kamikaze myth died because of everything that was happening because the gods did and protect them from an enemy who had bombs that could wipe out an army. The island of Tsushima is where tourists explore where the first samurai died and pay their respects to those who were brutally murdered to protect. Also, everyone who had passed because of the war, the sea, and the tsunami are also remembered to show that the invasion was horrible to everyone at that time. Everyone lost someone dear in the invasion. In the end, history shows that everyone suffered from the event, whether it be the Mongol, samurai, or regular citizens. The 80 men who died on the beach did everything they could to protect their home and families and would want those who survived to keep their heads held high.